Welcome to the podcast, Science of High Paid, High Performing, Happy Engineers, the show to help engineers develop all skills non technical. My name is Aditya Gute, and I'm a speaker and a performance coach for engineers to transform them into rock stars.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. We have Jesse Walker today. Jesse Walker is an engineering staffing consultant with Orbis. He works with a variety of high-profile tech and finance firms in their search for passionate engineers. In an effort to better understand his clients and candidates' needs, he has started programming at night to shed light on some of the nuances of different roles. That's a pretty cool thing that you're doing, Jesse, and I've seen some of your YouTube videos on coding. So would love to hear your journey on how you embarked on this journey of recruiting other tech professionals.
Yeah, of course. And thanks for having me, Aditya. I don't want to make it too long of a story, but I don't think anybody necessarily chooses to be a recruiter. I think everybody that's in recruiting kind of falls backwards into it. My background before I got into recruiting, I worked in a variety of gyms for 10 years. I coached CrossFit for 10 years. I coached it for 10 and I made people do it for 5. So, it was a really great time. But at some point I was just like, okay, I think I've seen all the squats that I need to see. And so I kind of embarked on a learning journey, read a bunch of books, and I just happened to have a client at the gym who worked at a recruiting place here in Nashville, and I had my start there. Great place to work, great place to learn. And then I joined up with Orbis in May of last year, and I had been tinkering with the idea of learning a little bit of code. One, just because it's interesting, like inherently, it's just really cool. But then also, one of the things that I felt was that there was this kind of technical gap that a hiring manager may say, I want a Python engineer that's doing work on Docker, Jenkins, Kubernetes, Terraform, Ansible, whatever. And then we would get them a service layer like application dev who's never done any config stuff, any monitoring stuff. And then they'd go, no, this person isn't a fit. And then we're upset and we're like, well, why? Right. And so there was this technical gap of, well, we clearly don't understand quite as much as maybe we should in order to best serve not only our clients, but then also the candidates, right? And really understand what it means when somebody's talking about what they do.
That's very interesting. Yes, that is a challenge I could imagine happen. So what made you dive deeper into like learning languages like Python? Because most, if you want to learn it, typically people just read about it or talk to people about it, but you literally started writing code.
Yeah.
Right? So what made you want to nose dive into this field?
Well, I think that it was part of it, if I'm just being honest, is it was a differentiation thing. I know that there's not many other recruiters out there that endeavor to learn this stuff. Exactly. And so if I can be a bit better, then hopefully candidates and clients can feel like they can trust me a bit more to really know what they want. It was, I guess, mid-year last year. Probably COVID didn't hurt that I was like stuck in the house like all the time. And I just wanted some like mental stimulation of some sort. And so, I got a Udemy course. It's called Zero to Mastery, which I think is kind of a funny name because there's no way I'm going to be a master at the end of a 30-hour class. But I really enjoy it. I've had the pleasure as well. Like some of the candidates that I've talked to have been kind enough to like sit down over video with me or over coffee and effectively look at stuff that I've written and go, okay, hey, effectively teach me how to see like an engineer sees. Hey, you've got these bugs. This variable is completely empty. You don't need it at all. Stuff like that. And it's been a great process so far. I've also had the good fortune of just like one of the most flattering things that's probably happened since I started learning the code is I've had some engineers reach out and say, hey, I saw what you're doing and it seems like you genuinely care. I'm on the market. I'd love to talk. And that is the biggest compliment in the world of like, okay, this is not going, not fruitlessly. It has produced some positive impact of some kind.
Absolutely. I think that is such an innovative idea, Jesse, just to be able to learn technology and be interested in it. And also being able to tap into your network, right? Engineers would love to talk to you when they're on the job market, and you have the community to help you out with coding, and you leverage them. So it's very innovative thought to distinguish yourself in this recruiting industry. So with that said, I want to ask you some questions to learn what goes behind the scenes when engineers send in job applications and you're having, especially during the times of COVID and there were a lot of layoffs. So Tell us a little bit about what happens behind the scenes when a job is posted and you get a ton of resumes. How do you filter out those candidates?
Yeah, that's a great big question, and I like those. So I think there's a few different angles to discuss kind of just initially. One is applying directly to a role. So applying directly to a client. Let's say you want to get into Google, Facebook, Amazon, that sort of thing, versus going through a recruiter or applying to a recruiter's job posting, that sort of thing. Some of the primary differences is that if you're applying directly to a role, in a lot of cases, especially the big tech firms, you're applying along with probably tens of thousands of people for the same job. And at some point, there's not a capacity for all of those resumes to be seen. And so in some cases, some places use algorithms to effectively, regex stuff and say, okay, this percent matching to the job description, that goes to the top, and says like, if they have a degree from this or that school, then they go to the top, that kind of stuff. Whereas recruiting, let's say sort of the same problem can happen if you're applying directly to or applying to a recruiter's role as well. Because I mean, even myself, I have, I think 90 some odd applicants to one role that I posted this week. And, at the same time, I'm trying to actively source and find people that fit the profile. And sometimes I just don't have the bandwidth to get through all the applicants. And so even internalized recruiters, sometimes we just don't have the bandwidth to go through all the profiles. And truth be told, both the companies, if you're applying direct, and us miss suitable candidates because of that kind of that bottleneck. It's just a time bottleneck. That said, in terms of identifying candidates, and I think probably one of the most effective ways is, at least this is what I suggest to people, is try to find 2 to 3 recruiters that you feel like you can trust and that you'd like genuinely get along with. And the reason I don't just say work with one recruiter, I'd love to be like, everybody just work with me, right? But The truth is, I don't have all the roles that somebody else may have, and vice versa. And so you span a larger array of roles by working with a few recruiters. I wouldn't go much higher than 3, because then it's like you could end up in a situation where you've got like 7 interview processes going on, and you work a full-time job. It's like you're gonna have to quit your job to interview, right? And so kind of narrow the scope a little to people that you feel like might have stuff that you're interested in. I guess that's maybe aside a bit from the original question, but in terms of identifying candidates, there are a few key things that, like, if I'm looking at LinkedIn right now, some things that are going to stick out, especially when I'm sourcing for kind of high profile tech or finance places. Some of the first things I'm looking for, and it's just part of it, is looking for good schooling, like solid education, and then experience in a solid company. And so generally speaking, I think the degrees thing is tough, but at the end of the day, a comp sci degree is really hard to beat. I mean, if you get a comp sci degree, it really makes you stand out, just because you're learning a lot, and really kind of the foundational information of how all these systems work. So that one makes you stand out. Obviously, the higher the degree, the better. The more prestigious the school, the better. And the same thing sort of applies with companies. If I find somebody at Google who's got a PhD from Harvard and they're open to opportunities, yeah, I'm going to message them along with every other recruiter in the world, right? So, that said, one of the things that I try to do personally is identify really exciting startups and folks who have been at exciting startups, because you have to get your hands so dirty in a startup. And in a lot of cases, you're doing greenfield things, like the platform's not there. And so, the fact that somebody could maybe be a primary contributor on a greenfield project, that's going to go a long way with a lot of people too.
Yeah. So I love those insights, especially building relationships with recruiters. I think most engineers don't focus on that. Once they're in the job market, they're like messaging different recruiters, and typically relationship building doesn't work that way, right? So what you're saying is, like, consciously build relationships with where you connect, have a genuine connection with at least like 3 people. So yeah. I love those insights, and also the way you took us through how, what makes a candidate more appealing, right? Yeah. So and another interesting piece that you also mentioned, Jesse, is that, when there is a job opening, besides going through the resumes that are sent to you, you also actively source candidates, right? Yeah. So that could be a challenging job, because there are a bunch of resumes sitting, and then you want to maybe actively look for an engineer, a simple engineer. So how do you decide between looking at the existing resumes versus actively sourcing candidates?
Yeah, that's a fun question, and it varies a lot from recruiter to recruiter. And I think a lot of it depends on your client base, kind of how you work. So this is a very behind the scenes sort of thing, but LinkedIn has a kind of version of their product called LinkedIn Recruiter that a bunch of recruiters use, right? And so it's a very creative name. But one thing that you can do on LinkedIn Recruiter is you can set up like a Boolean string of different things that so a lot of my clients look for Python engineers with X number of years of experience that have been at their current company for at least 2 years, stuff like that. I can put in all of those filters, and then I can save the search. And then anytime a profile that matches those criteria changes, either to open new opportunities, or maybe they don't even put that in and they just change their profile. That by itself tells me, hey, this person is marketing their skills. They wouldn't do that in case, like, if they didn't want to hear about stuff, right? And so that's one way. I rely heavily on those just because it's kind of like this constant feed of people that look pretty good. Otherwise, splitting time between looking at applicants and actively sourcing really depends on the role. If the role's requirements are not too rigid, if it's kind of like your run-of-the-mill application engineer and they don't need some kind of weird nuancy thing, I might spend more time on applicants. Whereas if it's a weird thing and they need like some financial experience with like equities, as an example, like that narrows things down a whole lot, and I have to be a bit more active on that.
So, and what are some of the signs of a great resume? I think you mentioned a couple of them already, which is that if you have schooling in computer science and you higher the degree, the better it is, the better the school, the better it is. Maybe someone who has worked in Google, Amazon, Facebook, and so on, right? So besides these, what are some of the other things that you're looking at when you have almost like little to no time to go through each resume?
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked, because, and this is, to me, this is more of the fun part of the job, because in some ways I feel bad in not looking at certain profiles because they don't match some prestige criteria, right? But when I'm drilling down in somebody's resume or profile, a couple things are really kind of important to me. Is one, does this person, how much ownership do they have over the thing that they're working on? You know, are they just building a thing that the requirement was given to them? They don't really understand the business impact. They just code it out, push it to production and say, okay, it's good. Or is this person interfacing with end users, gathering requirements, splitting out the specs, or maybe not, and just building the whole thing themselves? And like, this project's their baby, right? Like, you know, those kinds of degrees of ownership is one thing. Another would be, you know, I kind of mentioned it briefly, is understanding the business impact. That is a skill, I think, that takes developing. It's a muscle that you flex, right? It's like, if you don't necessarily have to know what the business impact of what you're engineering is, you could get by without knowing it. But saying, okay, I did this new provisioning thing that reduced our time to production by 50%, that's dramatic. Like, and folks would want to know that, right? Like, and it's attractive. And so I think that that's one thing. And then lastly, what I was going to say, I'm kind of like a Snoopy engineer. So I'll go on people's GitHubs. I'll, like, if they have like their Twitter account connected or they have a personal site, I'll always kind of go around and check those things out. Sometimes, more now that I'm like learning a bit of code, like sometimes I'll even go look at their like main.py file or whatever and go, okay, like this looks pretty good. Or at least just like, that's really more just me learning, but it's cool to look at least. Another thing I suppose I should mention is when I'm looking at, like, let's say LinkedIn profiles, a little bit of like personal flavor goes a long way for me. You know, if it looks like your profile is just like a robot, it's like, and you know, like, you're a real person, I know, but like, show me who you are a little, right? I mean, it helps to connect and give something. Like, if somebody says, hey, you know, something with my dog, right? And it's like, okay, sweet, I have a dog. I can talk to them about their dog. It like gives something to connect on a deeper level than just like this transactional, hey, I've got this role. Do you want it sort of thing?
That is such a great point. And, I coach engineers around job search, career development. And this is one of the big pieces that they miss, especially engineers. We are trained to just develop our technical skills, right? So we look at ourselves as good at technical skills, but then add a little flavor to it, because that's where you can actually connect with other people. I love those points, Jesse.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have for someone who enters the tech industry from an unusual background?
Yeah.
I mean, what reasons do you have to even look at that person's resume?
It's a great question. And I'll just say outright to anybody who endeavors to enter this field from something else, kudos, because it's a hard thing to do. And it's at least it is a long road, I think, is maybe fair to say. My suggestion to folks who are looking to break into the industry would be, obviously, you're going to have to do a lot of studying and preparation on your own time. Building out personal projects that you can kind of show people. But then also, there's a ton of great, like, easy open source contributions that people can do to kind of build up their GitHub and make it look a bit more attractive. And it also shows that you can work in a team-ish environment, like a team-like engineering environment, contributing to one thing. So I think those are two things. Not being afraid of internships. Obviously, this is going to be very life dependent from person to person. Somebody may be able to take 6 months and do an unpaid internship, or like a very low paid internship, just to kind of get their foot in the door, where others might not have that privilege or that leisure to kind of like make that move in that way. I think continuing just to build out that pipeline. To the last part of your question of like, are those profiles that I would look at? It depends. I think one of the things is what is my client looking for? Obviously, it's like at some point, like I have to kind of think about that. But by the same token, I've talked to a number of people who have come from outside of tech into tech. And if anything, I love talking to those people because they've probably walked a similar path to what I'm just barely starting on now. And so I have so much respect for it. And if anything too, I want to help people, whether it's preparing for technical interviews, giving them any insight I can, or resources. A lot of times I may not have a role for that person, but I have a network. And, if I meet Bobby and I know this hiring manager named Stan, and I know that Bobby and Stan would get along great because they both do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, it's like perfect, right? At least it's worth an introduction, right? So then Bobby can talk to Stan, and Stan can give him some more insider advice and that sort of thing.
Great tips, Jesse. And on the same note, if a person with tech background takes a couple of years off, maybe he was trying his own startup, doing some other things, and wants to jump back into the tech again, what are some of your suggestions in addition to what you have already mentioned about those coming from a different background?
Yeah. Well, and I'm so glad that you asked this question, because I think it is a sensitive one, sort of, right? Like it can be, because sometimes it's, I just wanted to try a startup. I just wanted to try something completely different, which shows a level of like being open to risk, which I think is a good thing. And then sometimes it's just life happens, and bad things happen, and you just got to take time, right? And in those cases, in either of those cases, any gaps, I think it is very easy to try and avoid or try to hide them. And when in reality, there is some power in vulnerability, is just being honest about something, like you don't necessarily have to like volunteer something unless it's like kind of bizarre. Like, yeah, I was out for like 5 years. Okay. That, like may need like a little like, hey, well, what'd you do? And I've seen great looking resumes where somebody has put in, past 2 years, I've been working on personal projects. And I want to get back into just an IC role. Great. Okay, cool. I think not being afraid to lean in and be honest about those gaps is a better option than trying to hide them or just kind of shuffling them to the side, because then it can seem like you're hiding something, which is,
Either red flag.
Yeah. And it can be scary to a hiring manager. Like, why doesn't this person want to be forthright with me about this thing? Right. When they could just tell me. I'm not going to say that every company is going to be as gracious about gaps. Some aren't, but at the end of the day, if that's not how if they're not open to that, then is it a place that you really want to be? Right.
Exactly. Finding the right fit is the key. So last question, Jesse, what are some of the resources you would like to share with our audience today about how they can ace those job interviews or just the job search process?
Yeah. Well, I did want to kind of circle back to one thing in terms of the job search process is connecting with human people. And you've kind of hinted at it a couple times, is networking is really your strongest tool. You can make a perfect resume, and if you don't know anybody, it's still going to be hard. And so I think that is step number one, is find some people that are in your circle, that are on your team, in your corner to help you, because you don't want to apply to 115 jobs and only like 5 of them got even viewed. It's brutal. So that's one. In terms of technical interviews, I've really been encouraging folks to hop onto LeetCode or Algo Expert. They're awesome resources, like kind of a necessary evil. We all know that you're probably not going to do a breadth search at work, but it's part of just understanding how somebody thinks and how they problem solve. And those are 2 great resources. Just generally speaking, some kind of more common stuff I've been seeing lately is been seeing a lot more grid and graph problems. So like unique paths, or kind of like a blob finder sort of thing. You got a grid with X's. It's like, hey, where are all of the connected X's? Those challenges seem to be coming up a bit more. It's kind of like creeping towards dynamic programming. But so neither here nor there. That's just a thing I've been noticing. Yeah.
Very cool. Jesse, you know why you are an amazing recruiter? It's because you're compassionate about people. You care about them at a deeper level. Not only about the people you recruit, but also the companies you are hiring for, because you're also learning a programming language, right? Just because you want to be better at finding differentiating the different job roles. So thank you again for sharing all the tools and techniques on how to get a job quickly and how to, increase the chances of getting your resume.
Yeah.
Any other final thoughts, Jesse, before today?
Nothing other than if anybody needs some help, I'm here to help. That's really it.
Thank you, Jesse, again, for being here and for all the value provided to the audience.
Of course, Aditya, I really, really appreciate it. It's been a blast.
Thank you.